My name is Captain Nora Vale, 31 years old, U.S. Army Reserve Logistics. I thought I understood discipline until the day my parents called me a failure and cut me out of their will. The hangar laughed too, until a single wildfire mission turned everything green. What would you do if respect came too late? Drop your thoughts below and hit subscribe. The morning hum of the armory was a sound I'd learned to love, a steady chorus of boot soles, radio static, and the faint metallic echo of lockers shutting in rhythm. The overhead fluorescents flickered the way they always did before drill, buzzing like tired hornets. Some people find comfort in silence. For me, it was this, the familiar noise of soldiers getting ready to work. My name is Captain Nora Vale, 31 years old, U.S. Army Reserve Logistics. I'd served one full deployment with the 1st Infantry Division before transferring to reserve status, trading daily field ops for long nights at a keyboard. These days, when I wasn't wearing this uniform, I worked as a civilian program analyst, and off-duty, I was quietly building something of my own, a logistics algorithm that could predict choke points before they happened. A small project, a big dream. At least that's what I thought. Behind me, a pair of young lieutenants laughed over something on a tablet. "Careful, Cap," one of them said. "Don't let that garage code crash the network again." I didn't turn. "It's sandboxed," I said evenly, stacking radio batteries into a crate. "And it hasn't crashed once." The other lieutenant chuckled. "Part-time hero, full-time coder." I smiled faintly. The way you do when a joke isn't worth correcting. Experience had taught me that some people measure worth by how loud you talk, others by what you quietly build. Still, the words hit harder than I wanted to admit, because hours earlier I'd read something worse. Inside my green notebook was a folded letter bearing the embossed seal of Vale & Associates Attorneys at Law, the firm that had handled my parents' estate planning since before I could drive. The first line was clinical. "Per the client's updated instructions, you have been formally excluded from the current testamentary allocation." Excluded. That was the word they used. My parents, both living, both healthy, had cut me out of the will. I'd stared at it until the letters blurred. No argument, no warning, just a verdict. "You have chosen a life that cannot sustain the Vale legacy," my father had written in an attached note. "Your brother carries our name forward. You chase causes. There's no inheritance in failure." The words echoed now, bouncing off concrete walls. At the far end of the hall, Sergeant Duval called out inventory counts. "Vale, you got the route cards updated?" "Yes, Sergeant." I slid the manifest across the counter. He nodded. "Always squared away?" I appreciated that. Simple acknowledgement, no judgment. As I worked, I thought about the irony. My parents built a legacy on contracts and concrete. I built systems that could save convoys from running dry halfway to a fire zone. To them, that was wasting potential. To me, it was purpose. Later that morning, we loaded a test pallet onto a flatbed. A new driver struggled to secure the straps. And instinctively, I stepped in. "Crisscross pattern, pull toward the center of gravity," I said, tightening the line until the ratchet clicked. He nodded, relieved. "Thanks, ma'am." "Don't thank me," I said quietly. "Thank training." Overhead, the smell of oil and dust mixed into the air. That heavy, honest scent every motor pool shares. For a moment, I let myself breathe it in. Out here, respect wasn't inherited. It was earned in small, invisible acts. Gear squared away, plan on time, no excuses. But even discipline has limits. When a corporal passed by holding a clipboard, I caught the smirk. "Still working on that side hustle, Captain? Maybe the family'll fund it if you put their logo on it." I didn't look up. "Negative, it's self-funded." He shrugged. "Must be nice having a backup inheritance." The joke stung more than it should have, because the truth was that inheritance was gone, stripped with a lawyer's pen. I checked my watch. 7:45. The convoy rehearsal brief would start in 15 minutes. Another day to prove, quietly, methodically, that purpose outlasts privilege. As I closed my notebook, the edge of the letter brushed my thumb. A small tremor of paper. A reminder. They'd written me off. But I'd learned something in uniform that they'd never understand. Systems fail quietly. Then suddenly. So do assumptions. And sometimes the quietest one in the room is the system they never saw coming. By midweek, our reserve unit had been assigned to support a state wildfire readiness exercise, a coordination drill between guard logistics, contractors, and emergency management. On paper, it was just another training cycle. In practice, it was where reputations were quietly made or quietly buried. I arrived early at the Joint Operations Center, coffee in hand, uniform pressed sharp enough to hold a crease through a storm. The conference room smelled like burnt paper and recycled air, screens flickering with satellite feeds and scrolling weather data. Around the table sat a mix of soldiers, civil engineers, and a few sleek-suited contractors with badges that read Aventra Systems, the current vendor for the state's logistics software. They carried themselves like they owned the place. In a way, they did. The lead rep, a man named Landon, adjusted his tie and smiled without warmth. "Captain Vale, right? I've heard about your initiative." He said it like a hobby. I kept my tone neutral. "Yes, sir. I've been developing a predictive route model for supply chains under dynamic conditions." He chuckled, flipping through slides on his tablet. "Dynamic conditions? That's adorable. Our enterprise suite already handles adaptive routing. You'd need 5 years and $20 million to replicate what we do." A few chuckles rippled around the table. I didn't join them. Across from me, the deputy S3, a colonel old enough to remember typewriters, gave me a sidelong glance. "Captain, your participation here is advisory. We don't want confusion about who's responsible for what." I nodded. "Understood, sir." The briefing rolled on. Every time I opened my mouth, Landon had a polished slide ready. Every statistic I mentioned, he countered with jargon and volume. By the end, I could feel the thin layer of credibility being stripped away like paint under sand. Still, I took notes. Quietly. Thoroughly. When the meeting adjourned, I gathered my files while the room emptied. One of the younger contractors lingered just long enough to whisper, "Keep coding, Captain. Maybe you'll build the next Facebook for soldiers." Then he left, his cologne lingering longer than his respect. I didn't answer. I just wrote down the phrase "Facebook for soldiers" in the margin of my notebook, a reminder. In this line of work, mockery was free. Results were currency. Later that day, in the rotary wing hangar, I found refuge in noise. The steady beat of rotor blades, the metallic clang of chain hoists, the hiss of fuel lines. Real work. No presentations, no posturing. "Captain, we got a problem with load sequencing." Sergeant Duval called from under a rotor housing. I joined him beside a half-loaded CH-47 pallet. The straps were tangled, the manifest sheet half-smeared. "Whose shift?" I asked. "New guys. They didn't check the order." I crouched beside the crates, running a finger across the ink. It wasn't just sloppy, it was inefficient. Their planned layout added 15 minutes to unload time. I reorganized it quietly, reassigning the heaviest pallets inward, pushing light containers to the outer edge. When we ratcheted the last strap, Duval gave a low whistle. "You've done this before." I shrugged. "A few times." He grinned. "They should let you run these drills." "They let me run them once," I said. "That's why they don't anymore." We both laughed. It wasn't bitterness, just reality. That night, I sat at my desk in the empty admin room. The hum of fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. I opened the DA form 4856 I'd been given months ago. A developmental counseling form for non-standard activity during duty hours. My commanding officer hadn't been cruel, just cautious. Ensure personal research projects do not conflict with official systems. I'd signed it, dated it, filed it. Regulation was regulation. Now I stared at the signature block and whispered, "You followed every rule." Because I had, and still it wasn't enough. On my screen, ForgeLine's interface glowed, a grid of routes, timestamps, and elevation data. The model wasn't pretty, but it was alive. Real-time weather feeds crawled across it like veins. Each flash of data told a story. Trucks delayed, choke points forming, lives potentially stranded. I leaned back and rubbed my eyes. The world measured success in stock prices and signatures. Out here, success was simpler, getting supplies there on time. Somewhere outside, a helicopter's engine spooled up, flooding the hangar with wind. Papers rustled across my desk. They laughed loudest when the sky was calm. They'd stop laughing when the fire reached the horizon, and I'd be ready. The checkpoint outside the armory was usually uneventful. A small guard booth, a retractable barrier, and the faint smell of diesel from idling Humvees. I'd passed through it hundreds of times without issue. But that morning, something was different. The scanner beeped, flashed red, and stayed red. The young gate guard, probably new to the shift, frowned. Ma'am, it's not reading your CAC. I removed my cap, stepped forward, and tried again. The scanner blinked, buzzed, and flashed red once more. Behind me, a pickup truck waited, its driver leaning out the window. I could already feel the attention on my back, the small but familiar sting of eyes watching. It should be fine, I said calmly. Try manual override. Serial ends in 057. The guard tapped at his terminal, then shook his head. System says expired credentials. Are you, still active? The question hit harder than I expected. I was standing there in uniform, boots polished, name tape aligned. Still active? A voice from the next lane cut through. Maybe she's on the wrong side of the gate. Followed by a laugh. Someone from our contractor team. I didn't turn. The guard shifted uncomfortably. Ma'am, you might need to use the visitor line. My jaw tightened. Specialist per AR 600-814. CAC validation issues are referred to the staff duty officer. Call it in. He hesitated, then picked up the phone. Within minutes, the SDO verified my active status, authorized manual entry, and the barrier lifted. Sorry, Captain. The guard said, still uncertain. I nodded. No harm done. It's the system's job to question. But as I drove through, something in me shifted. I'd been verified by regulation, not respect. That evening, I attended a small fundraiser in Arlington, one of those polite affairs my mother called family obligations. The invitation had arrived weeks earlier, back when I was still in the will. I considered skipping it, but old habits die hard. The restaurant was dim, all amber light and soft jazz. Waiters moved like ghosts between tables covered in crystal and linen. I spotted my parents near the back, my father in his tailored gray suit, my mother wrapped in silk and certainty. Nora, my mother said, kissing the air near my cheek. You look disciplined. That was her word for plain. My father barely looked up from his drink. You're still chasing that project? Yes, I said simply. He nodded toward the hedge fund manager beside him. This is what your brother's working with. Real capital, real legacy. You could have been part of it. The word could felt like a sentence. I excused myself, stepping toward the balcony for air. The noise of laughter and glass behind me blurred into static. I checked my phone. A new message from my attorney. Finalization complete. Estate revision effective immediately. No ceremony. No closure. Just confirmation. I stared at the message until the city lights doubled in my eyes. Back inside, I overheard my mother's voice. Sweet, polished, poisoned. She's brilliant, of course. She was telling a group of guests. But she's always been idealistic. You know how it is. Some children inherit vision, others inherit heart. Polite laughter followed, the kind people use when they sense a wound but pretend it's art. I set my glass down and walked out before anyone noticed. Driving home through the quiet streets, I thought of that gate scanner flashing red. Expired credentials, wrong side of the line. That was how they saw me. a soldier out of place in a world run by money. But humiliation, I'd learned, was fuel. Every deployment, every dismissal, every red light only confirmed one truth. Systems fail when pride writes their code. And if they wanted to see me as the outsider, fine. I'd build something so undeniable that even their scanners couldn't block it. I parked in front of my apartment, engine idling, phone glowing in the dark. The message from the attorney was still open. Your exclusion has been executed per client instruction. I read it again, calm now. Because what they didn't realize, what none of them realized, was that I'd already started writing my own will, one line at a time. 3 days later, the fire came. It started as a small brush flare in the foothills, but strong winds turned it into a moving front. By nightfall, it had crossed 2 containment lines and was threatening a nearby town. Our reserve detachment was activated under Defense Support of Civil Authorities, DSCA, tasked to assist state emergency services with supply convoys and evac route stabilization. The Joint Operations Center was chaos. Radios barked updates, screens glowed red with shifting wind maps, and a dozen officers shouted over each other trying to make sense of competing data. I stood along the back wall, clipboard in hand, waiting for orders that never came. The Aventra Systems team, the same contractors who'd mocked me days earlier, had the floor. Their routing platform was up on the main screen, projecting convoy plans across digital terrain. It looked impressive until you noticed the lag. Road 212 just closed. Update ETA, one major said. Landon, the contractor lead, frowned. We're recalculating. Should only take a moment. A moment stretched to 2 minutes, then 3. In wildfire logistics, that's the difference between a convoy and a casualty report. A red icon blinked on the map. Convoy 6, carrying water tanks and medical kits, was stalled near a canyon bridge. I knew that road. It was narrow, boxed in by ridges. If the wind shifted, they'd be trapped. My hands clenched around the clipboard. Sir, I said quietly to the SPO, Support Operations Officer, I have an alternate route preloaded. Lower elevation, crosswind safe, verified clearance. He looked up, skeptical. You're telling me your model's faster than Aventra's satellite feed? Not faster, I said evenly. Just built for terrain like this. The room fell silent. Landon turned. Captain, with respect, our system is officially contracted. The SPO cut him off. Captain, you have this route documented? Yes, sir. I opened my folder and slid a printed overlay across the table. The paper was creased but precise. Road designations, fuel burn, convoy time marks, choke points color-coded. At the top was a timestamp and my initials. Authorization? He asked. Advisory only, sir. No orders issued. He hesitated, then exhaled. Per DSCA procedure, I can approve advisory data for review, but the decision's mine. Yes, sir. He signed the corner of my map. We'll test it. Landon stepped forward. Colonel, this is irregular. You're basing route adjustments on an untested prototype from a reservist with... The colonel's glare froze him mid-sentence. You had 3 minutes and no solution. I'll take her irregular over your red icons. Minutes later, we were outside in the staging area. The smell of smoke was heavy now, the kind that clings to skin. Convoys idled in 2 neat rows, headlights cutting through haze. I climbed into the rearguard Humvee, headset crackling with overlapping chatter. Convoy 6 copies alternate routing. A driver called, requesting confirmation. SPO's voice came through steady. Follow Captain Vale's overlay. Maintain radio silence after checkpoint Bravo. We rolled out, tires crunching over gravel, taillights forming a slow-moving ribbon in the dark. The air shimmered orange at the horizon. I checked my stopwatch. 0:00. From that moment, every turn, every delay would count. Inside the cab, the driver glanced at me. Ma'am, this your plan? I nodded. He grinned nervously. Hope you're right. Hope's not part of it, I said. Math is. We hit the ridge 20 minutes later, just as the wind shifted east. Through the windshield, I saw flames licking the sky where the old route would have been. My breath caught, not from fear, but from the cold realization that if we'd waited another 5 minutes, that convoy would have been trapped. I radioed in. Checkpoint Bravo reached. Bridge impassable on prior route. Alternate secure. Copy that, Captain, came the reply. In the distance, sirens wailed. Faint, hollow, human. I watched the flicker fade behind us and whispered, "You never know which test is live until it's too late." When we finally reached the drop zone, local responders were waiting. Supplies unloaded, manifests signed, drivers debriefed, all by the book. No one cheered. No one clapped. They just nodded. In the military, that's all the applause you need. The after-action review was held 2 days later in a briefing room that still smelled faintly of smoke and stale coffee. The wildfire was contained, the mission complete. But the real fire, the one made of words and reputations, was just beginning. The SPO sat at the head of the table, uniform pressed, sleeves rolled. A big screen showed the convoy telemetry logs, blue lines for planned routes, green for actual. On the map you could see it clearly. The deviation I'd proposed, cutting south before the ridge. The green line made it through. The blue one disappeared into a red hazard zone labeled Bridge Collapse, 2230 hours. The colonel leaned forward, reading from the report. Convoy 6 reached Site Alpha 23 minutes ahead of schedule. 0 cargo loss, no injuries. Route variation authorized under DSCA Annex C, Section 3. He set the page down and looked around the table. I don't like surprises, but that was the right call. The contractor, Landon, cleared his throat. Sir, with respect, we can't draw conclusions from a single data point. Aventra's platform is designed for strategic use, not field improvisation. Captain Vale's input, while admirable, isn't formally validated. The colonel's eyes didn't move from him. It is now. Her plans logged, signed, and time-stamped. That makes it data, and in my command, data speaks louder than pride. Landon's jaw tightened. He muttered something about open-source liabilities, then went quiet. I didn't gloat. I just sat still, hands folded, heart steady. When the review ended, the colonel called me aside. Captain Vale, he said, his tone measured but not cold. You handled yourself well out there. You didn't break protocol. You used it. I'm forwarding this report to the State Logistics Readiness Center. Yes, sir, I said. He nodded once. Don't thank me. Thank your math. That line stayed with me, not because it was praise, but because it was truth. Outside, the air was cool again. The kind of calm that comes after chaos burns itself out. As I crossed the parking lot, a voice called after me. Captain? It was Landon. He jogged up, tablet under one arm, smile forced. Listen, I may have come off dismissive. The field's tough. Tempers run high. I regarded him evenly. You were doing your job. He exhaled through his nose. Right. Look, Aventra has upcoming contracts that could use your kind of insight. You ever think about leaving the reserve, doing this full-time? There it was. The pivot. The subtle attempt to buy what they couldn't beat. I shook my head. Appreciate it, but I already have a job. He nodded stiffly and walked away, checking his phone before he'd even turned the corner. In this world, apologies often came dressed as offers. That night, I sat in my small apartment, desk light illuminating the AAR summary the colonel had forwarded. A single line near the bottom stood out. Recommendation: initiate limited pilot program for predictive routing model. Designation: forge line. I stared at the words until they blurred. It wasn't approval. It was procedure. But in the military, procedure was progress. My phone buzzed. A new message from my brother. Saw your name in that wildfire report. Impressive. Dad says it's time to come home. Stop trying to prove a point. I typed 3 words. I'm already home. Then deleted them. Instead, I wrote, Busy this week. Review pending, and hit send. Because he'd never understand that home wasn't an address. It was a team, a mission, a system that finally listened. The next morning, the SPO stopped me outside the admin building. Vale, packet's moving up. LRC wants a technical brief next week. You ready? Yes, sir, I said. He grinned. Good. Bring that brain. Leave the modesty. I smiled. No promises. He shook his head. Every time they underestimate someone, I get better results. Maybe I should make it policy. As he walked away, I caught my reflection in the glass door. Uniform slightly wrinkled, circles under my eyes, but standing taller than I had in months. No one clapped. No cameras flashed. But something had shifted. Not just in the chain of command, but in me. The mockery had gone quiet. And in its silence, competence finally had the floor. Our pilot authorization came through quietly, the way most real victories do. Not with applause, but with an email stamped, approved for limited evaluation. No headlines, no ceremony, just a new line of responsibility, one that meant everything. ForgeLine, the system they'd once called adorable, now had an official project code, a case number, and a short paragraph under purpose. Evaluate predictive logistics tool for terrain-aware routing under dynamic emergency conditions. It wasn't glory. It was recognition. And in uniform, that's better. I spent the next few weeks splitting time between drills, my civilian job, and a small co-working loft near the base that became our makeshift command post. Exposed brick walls, whiteboards covered in marker scrawls. The hum of old servers cooling under folding tables. It was humble. It was home. My first call was to Staff Sergeant Leo Anders, a former 25B from my active duty days, a systems admin who could make code sing. He showed up with 2 monitors, a thermos of black coffee, and a grin that hadn't aged. Still trying to outsmart the chain of command, ma'am? He asked. Not outsmart, I said. Just keep it honest. Next came Corporal Ramos, a 92A I'd trained years ago. Quiet, precise, sharp with numbers. She handled supply data like a surgeon handles a scalpel. And Private First Class Lynn, a National Guard firefighter on state orders, joined as liaison. He knew wildfire terrain the way infantry know ambush zones. We didn't look like a corporate startup. We looked like what we were, soldiers and vets chasing an idea because it worked. Funding was lean. The OTA microgrant we received wouldn't even cover a contractor's bonus, but it was enough to keep lights on and servers running. Everything else came from sweat and favors. Cap, we're gonna need new hardware if we want real-time simulation, Leo warned, tapping at his aging keyboard. I glanced at the empty pizza box on the table. We'll recycle cables before we recycle ideas. He chuckled. There's the motivational poster. We worked 12-hour days, running mock dispatches, adjusting route weights, and verifying every data source twice. No shortcuts, no good enough. Ramos handled reporting, cross-referencing times, and fuel logs from the wildfire operation. Our variance is under 2%, she said one evening, eyes wide. You realize what that means? I did. It meant the system didn't just match the big vendor, it outperformed it. But success in uniform isn't about bragging. It's about repeatability. Run it again, I said. Same conditions, different inputs. She nodded. Roger that. A few weeks later, I returned to the armory for drill. Same gate, same booth. The guard scanned my CAC. The reader flashed green. He looked up and smiled. All good, ma'am. It was such a small thing. A scan working, a barrier rising. But the sound of that beep felt like closure. Inside, I passed by the same corporal who once joked about inheritance. He gave a short nod. Heard about your pilot, Captain. Congrats. Thank you, I said simply. No sarcasm, no resentment, just acknowledgement. Sometimes respect doesn't come through speeches, it comes through silence. A week later, I received an invitation from the sustainment school at Fort Lee. a request to deliver a short guest block on predictive logistics and convoy risk mitigation. I hesitated. Teaching wasn't in my plan. But then I thought about the young lieutenants who'd laughed that first morning and how I used to be one of them. Certain the loudest person in the room was the smartest. So I went. The classroom smelled like chalk dust and ambition. I spoke for 30 minutes, walking cadets through the wildfire case study. Decision flow, terrain weights, command authority. No heroics, just process. When it ended, a young officer approached me. "Ma'am, can I ask something?" "Of course." "Didn't it bother you, being dismissed like that?" I paused, thinking back to the laughter, the red scanner, the smirks. "Sure," I said. But only until I realized their opinions didn't move supplies. Results did. He nodded slowly, like someone filing away a lesson for later. That evening, I got a call from my mother. Her tone was polite, almost rehearsed. "Your father and I read about your project in the paper. We're proud you've found something meaningful." It wasn't warmth. It was recognition through gritted teeth. "Thank you," I said. "I'm glad you finally see it." After a pause, she asked softly, "Will you come by for dinner?" "Not tonight," I said. "Got work to finish." And for once, I hung up without guilt. The next morning, I stood at the loft window, watching dawn light spill across the city. Below, cars moved like tiny convoys, each on its own mission, each trusting unseen systems to guide them. I turned back to the whiteboard, marker in hand. It was time to write the next phase. Weeks passed, and the city settled back into its rhythm. Quiet, efficient, unknowing of the small wars fought in conference rooms and convoy routes. Forge Line kept learning. So did I. There were no parades, no headlines, no family dinners filled with applause. Just metrics improving, convoys arriving, and names on reports no one outside our circle would ever read. And honestly, that was enough. Because real legacies aren't written in inheritance letters or marble plaques. They're built in silence, line by line, through the hands that refuse to stop working when the world says enough. Sometimes I think about that red scanner at the gate, the one that once flashed denial. These days it turns green before I even reach the booth. Not because I demanded respect, but because I earned clarity. Systems change when the people inside them do. And respect? That's not a gift. It's a protocol. Follow it long enough and it follows you back. As soldiers, builders, or quiet professionals, we all face that moment, when the world calls us failures and the system blinks red. But if you keep showing up, keep doing the work, one day the gate opens. Have you ever seen someone written off until competence rewrote the story? If you have, like this video, share it with someone building quietly, and subscribe to Echoes of Revenge. We post a new story